Politics tonight. This past weekend, as you may know, conservative Republican Michael Cloud of Victoria came out on top of a field of 9 candidates, all vying to fill on a temporary basis the District 27 congressional seat, a seat formerly held by Blake Farenthold. Today, Cloud stopped by our studios to talk about the victory and what he hopes to accomplish in that office. And I asked him today about his position on immigration and the ongoing crisis at the border.
Immigration has been a big part of our campaign for months, and so what we've talked about in immigration, for example, I've said 4 things that we need to happen. We need to enforce the border. We need to work on immigration courts because there's a backlog there. We need to defund sanctuary cities because if we're going to expect our citizenry to follow the law, we need to expect our elected officials who take an oath to follow the law.
But Mr. Cloud,
yes.
What I suggest to you is that families have been separated as a result of President Trump's zero tolerance policy. And that is the big issue right now. A lot of people have taken a position one way or the other. What's your position?
Sure. I have taken a position on it. Spoke about it weeks ago. It should not be the policy of the United States to intentionally, maliciously separate families. What we saw was the president say, we're going to enforce the border. The result of that was families being separated.
Are you okay with that?
We're working to fix that, and I'm happy to see the solutions that are coming forth to fix it. We need to be proactive about fixing it.
The congressman today on immigration. By the way, the congressman-elect, that is, will be officially sworn in next week. Of course, he's facing Democrat Eric Olguin in November for the full 2-year term in that congressional seat. We have